Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, today's webinar. I'm Karen Sar. I'm the Director of Development here at the Israel Religious Action Center, the legal and advocacy arm of the Reform Movement in Israel. And today's topic, I'm very excited, is taking it to the street, the current protest movement in Israel. Before we begin, some housekeeping items. As always, we are recording this presentation, and we will send you the recording. We can't have it translated now, not translated, transliterated, but it will be once we send it. If you have a question, please either raise your hand, write in the chat box, or in the Q&A. Unlike this presentation will be a bit different in the sense that we will have Q&A session after each of the speakers. We will start with Judy Maltz, the senior writer in IRAC. She'll talk to us about the origin of the protest and its impact on the Israeli society. We will break for our Q&A after. Then we will hear from Dani Danieli, a political activist and an organizational consultant, who will talk to us about what it is to be protesting for over 3 years in the streets. And then we'll summarize with Anat and Noah. We will have a more in-depth presentation of our speakers as we move forward. And with this, I'm going to mute myself and leave the floor to Noah to take it over for the rest of the presentation. Enjoy.
So thank you all for joining us today. Our usual webinars focus on the work of IRAC. And here we are focusing on something that we wanted to inform you about and share with you, which is happening on the streets of Israel. So I'm just going to give a broad context before I let our speakers take the floor. So as you're all aware, in the past 18 months, Israel's been through elections 3 times. And in all those elections, we've seen high voting rates, and actually the last elections that happened this spring, we had the highest record of voting. Over 70% of the registered voters voted, which is a testament to how Israelis want to participate in the system. But unlike in North America and in other places, Israelis don't often take to the streets. And so this current protest movement is very interesting and inspiring in both the depth of involvement of the people and the scope of involvement and the vast joining together of different forces, which is what we want to share with you today. Because this is a highly political protest movement, we at IRAC and at the IMPJ are now joining the movement as this is not our mission, but there are many topics that are extremely relevant to the protest movement that are touching upon our issues, and that is where we will conclude. But I wanted to give that context before we dive into the speakers, who I am very eager to hear from. So I am going to give it to Anat, who is going to introduce Judy.
So shalom, my name is Anat Hoffman. I'm the Executive Director of the Israel Religious Action Center, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to introduce to you Judy Maltz, which is my, we really are lucky to have Judy. She's on vacation. She just arrived at the Sea of Galilee, and she locked her family outside the bedroom, and she's sitting there. Thank you so much for joining us. She's a senior writer at Haaretz. We read her in English and in Hebrew. There are very few journalists that actually invent their area of expertise and reportage, and she's one of them. She has she's been able to explain to Israelis that there are more Jews in the world and that they're very interesting. And they're in Brazil and in Greece and Hungary, in the US and in Uganda. And this is something that Israelis who are quite ethnocentric are not aware of, that there are more Jewish communities in the world and that they're very interesting. And we are not the center of the planet. This is very important. And she won the B'nai B'rith World Center Award for Journalism, recognizing her excellence in diaspora reportage. She is an expert on enabling diaspora Jews to understand what seems to be sometimes irrational decisions on the part of Israelis, just like Noah just explained. We went to 3 election campaigns within a year and a half. That requires some explanation. Judy will do what she does best. Judy explain why Israelis are taken to the streets, why now, who is demonstrating, what do they want to achieve, and what does it all mean? Judy was born in Newark, but not in the airport, and she made Aliyah to Israel. She's a mother of 4, and as I explained, she's in the middle of vacation. Thank you, Judy. Go ahead.
My pleasure. Thank you, Anat. Let me tell you why I find these protests so interesting and so unusual. First of all, I recommend anybody who hasn't been to the protests, even if you don't believe in them, go, because it's such a great experience. It's something like you've never seen before in the streets of Israel. I've now dragged friends and family members to come with me because I don't really know how to explain it. I say you have to be there to understand, because yes, it's a protest, but it's also a festival, and it's kind of like Mardi Gras. And one of the amazing things about it is because of the coronavirus, we have so many artists and performers who are out of work. And what do they do now? And there's all this creative energy that is being unleashed when you go out in the streets. It's amazing. You can stand in one, like there's stations. You can have Israeli folk dancing in one corner. You can have the young Philharmonic in another playing. Of course, there are yoga and meditation sessions. And the costumes are amazing. And the signs, which are all handmade. And people make them at home and bring them. And it is just, there is so much to take in. And there's so much creativity and energy. So I say, just forget about the politics. Just go to see something really interesting that you've never seen before. Now, Noah says we don't usually have protests in Israel. And I guess that's true. We do have the usual every year on November 4th or around that date, you get a few thousand people who come to Rabin Square in Tel Aviv. And, maybe a few more protests like that every year. What really I find exciting about this particular protest is that for once you have young people out on the streets. And I remember I have so many friends with young kids, when I say young, teenagers in their 20s, mid-20s, late 20s, and it is always so difficult for them to get their kids to join them when they go to protests. And if you went to protests in Israel anytime before now, you would see that most people are middle-aged and older. Young people don't come to protests until now. And there's so much young energy. And what happened? Okay, why are young people suddenly coming out to the streets? So I think there's a couple things here, because usually they were so apathetic. In fact, I did this whole project about young Israelis. It was published the day before the election on March 1st. Really, I was trying to understand, why is it that where every other country in the world, the young people are leading change. And in Israel, they want to sit in cafes or go to clubs at night, and they have no real interest, it didn't seem, in social activism or politics. And then suddenly all of this changed. So what was going on? So I think one thing for sure, it has to do with Corona, and it has to do with Corona on a number of different levels. Number one, a lot of young people lost their jobs because of this pandemic. The young were disproportionately represented in the people who were laid off. Because young Israelis, what do young people anywhere do? They're waiters and waitresses, they're freelancers, they don't belong to unions, they don't work in essential factories. So they were the first ones to feel this. Number two, if you know anything about Israeli culture, you know that it is kind of a rite of passage of young Israelis after they finish the army to go and take a year and travel the world. And suddenly they couldn't do that anymore. So they were in the country without jobs, without really anything to do, not yet in university, or if they were in university, they didn't really have to go to classes because they could just, sit at home on Zoom. And so there was something to do. But I think it's more than that. It's not just that they were just looking to meet other people and go out in the street. I think two things happen here. Many young people said that the trigger for them was the arrest of someone. I'm not sure if, I was about to say our readers, our viewers abroad have ever heard of the name Amir Haskel. Probably not, so I'll just, in a few words, I'll tell you who he is. He's a 68-year-old retired Air Force Brigadier General. And he, for the past 4 years, has been demonstrating on his own, usually near his home. He lives in Gan Yavne, and you can find him there a few times a week, holding up signs that are crying out against Netanyahu's corruption. And he was at a very small protest. This must have been about close to 2 months ago in Jerusalem, on a Friday afternoon, like he always is, with some of his gray-haired friends, no offense to anybody, and he got arrested. And it wasn't really clear why he got arrested, and he spent the night in jail. Something about it, when this news of this was broadcast, it resonated with young people, that suddenly people understood that there was this retired brigadier general who for 4 years had been out there protesting against corruption for a more democratic country. And he was suddenly, for no reason, it seemed, arrested. And many of them started coming out. That's when it started. I think another reason was that we have been talking for years about corruption and allegations of corruption against our prime minister. But I think when our prime minister went to the Knesset Finance Committee 2 months ago, or maybe less, I don't remember exactly, asking during the midst of this coronavirus, as hundreds of thousands of people were being laid off, to get some tax rebate on money that had been spent for remodeling or maintenance of his private villa in Caesarea. It really rubbed people the wrong way. I don't think a lot of people, young people, cared about corruption when they had good jobs and they could afford to travel and go to restaurants and clubs. But suddenly when they're out of work and the prime minister does something like that, they took offense. And I think that is they suddenly understood what corruption is. And you'll see a lot of the signs up there talk about the prime minister and the government being out of touch. And I think that really, that symbolized it, going to the Knesset.
Thank you, Judy. I'm happy to take any questions from the participants. And before that, I wanted to ask you, where do you think all this is heading? In terms of, we've seen this protest movement growing in the past weeks, and as I'm letting our participants ask you questions, I wanted to ask you about where do you think the protest movement is heading, and who do you think, I think one of the remarkable things is the diverse leadership, or even the invisible leadership. How do you think that will progress in the coming weeks and months?
So it's really, really difficult to say. You know, on the one hand—
That's why we have you here. We wanted a very smart person to answer the very difficult questions.
Thank you, Noah. You know, it's difficult to say because these things have a way of fizzling out. You know, you can't expect people to come back week after week. And if you've been to the protests in Jerusalem, you know, people come from all over the countries. There's buses, they drive. You know, you have to find parking. It's, you know, it's not easy. And to do this, to do it once is fine, to do it twice, but to do it week after week, and remember the weather is great now. In a month from now, we are not going to have as great weather. It may not be as much fun to stand out in the rain or the cold. So those are factors that we have to take into account. I think there was a little bit of fear that last night, Saturday night, that the numbers would be down because of this surprise peace agreement with the UAE. And many people thought, or those who support the protest movement feared that, okay, Bibi's bringing peace. He's not that bad after all. We can do something else tonight. Now, I don't know if anybody really knows the numbers, how many people showed up. They say there were 10,000 last night in Jerusalem, I'm talking about, as compared to 15,000 the week before. But nobody knows the numbers because it's also not clear. Are they talking about the numbers at one given point in time around the prime minister's house? Or is it the numbers, you know, if you've been there, you see people start coming, they walk in, they leave, others come later and stay. So what is the number, right? So I don't think we know. And it's difficult when you're in the middle standing there to really know, is this 10,000, 20,000, 30,000? But what's clear is a lot did come last night. And I think those who feared that we were going to see a drop and that the square there was going to be empty, that didn't happen. And I can tell you, last night, for a change, I went up to Caesarea. That's where Bibi's private villa is. I wanted to see what was going on there. And there were also many, many people, I would say at least 1,000, 2,000 people out there in the square. They don't really let you get near Netanyahu's house, but they're in a main square in Caesarea. And that seemed to be a similar number to previous weeks. And you know, if you drive down the highways in Israel and you look at the bridges, still the same numbers seem to be there. I didn't feel that there was any drop. Again, but then you have these things that can happen, like peace with the UAE, or, you know, there could also be an election. So I would assume that if there's an election, more people will show up, right? Because change becomes more tangible then, right? So that's another possibility. So that you have all these factors, whether then, you know, maybe Bibi will come out and say he's in favor of a two-state solution, actually. So, you know, what's going to happen then? Probably, maybe not that many people will come as came last week. So many factors we don't know. I don't want to make predictions at this point.
Thank you. So many people are asking about the the goals of the movement or the goals of the protest. So Dani, I'm going to give you that question as well if you don't cover it in your presentation. But could you give us your perspective on that, Judy? What are the goals? Some people are asking if the goal is resignation, what comes after resignation from Netanyahu? Or what are the demands?
So I think the common goal of the protesters is to get Bibi out of office, for sure. But you will see if you come there that there's lots of groups with all sorts of different goals. And in fact, I heard that last night there was actually a small group of right-wingers who were there who were angry at Bibi because he basically gave up on the annexation plan. So, you know, there's people on the right and on the left who have grievances against him. And they don't all want the same thing. There are people out there who would like to see more women in politics. There was this wonderful little march I saw last week of all women dressed in pink, and they were carrying the Israeli flag, but instead of blue and white, it was pink and white. There were some fabulous pictures of that. So, you know, that's what some people would want. Let's get more women in government. The men obviously aren't doing a good job here. What else will you see? You will see environmentalists there. You will see, there are people there who would like Israel to stop selling arms to rogue regimes. I mean, there's so many different causes there. Mainly left, but also some right. And yeah, I think probably for most people, if you would ask them and you say what the day after, they would say, let's just get Netanyahu out of the prime minister's office. We would be okay even with another Likud prime minister. That would be better as long as it's not Netanyahu. Obviously, that would not be their best case scenario, but just anyone but him, because he, according to these people, is just so corrupt and he doesn't care about us and he only cares about himself, and enough is enough, and he's been in power for too long. So anything but him.
Okay, thank you. A question I'm so glad we have you for. How much influence do you think Trump has had on Bibi? And Ken Marion is saying that the corruption sounds so familiar to American ears.
No, I think Bibi, the allegations against Bibi, things he did, started way before Trump was president of the United States. I mean, if you remember when Bibi first became prime minister in 1996, that's when all the stories started about how he didn't like to spend his own money and would always conveniently forget his wallet when he was at restaurants. So this is something that really predates Trump. Maybe he feels now that if Trump can get away with it, you know, maybe he can get away with it, or he has nothing to apologize for, because this is how world leaders all over behave. So I don't know. But I thought what you were asking me was how much has Trump influenced him or been an important factor in this whole. So, you know, clearly, I mean, it's obvious that Bibi, I think, would have wanted to go through with this annexation plan, and he still refuses to say that it's over. So clearly, Trump was able to influence him here and basically was the factor who put an end to it.
Don't you think, I mean, from my perspective, the Trump regime has had a radicalizing effect on the right wing here, in the sense that in the same way that norms were broken in the US regarding democracy, they were also broken here, that the US government has always had a mitigating effect on the right wing government here. and during the Trump regime that has almost entirely disappeared up until last week. We've seen it only as the floodgates of anti-democratic trends was opened by the Trump government.
Right. Yeah. No, he definitely has been an enabler for Netanyahu. I think things that Netanyahu may have been embarrassed to say or do before Trump, he wasn't embarrassed to say or do during the Trump years. So for sure, he has had that sort of influence on him.
So I see many questions here that I think Dani Danieli would answer in his presentation or later, and maybe then we can bring them to both of you. But we actually wanted to create a whole webinar with the title of Kenneth's question, which is, do Israelis actually like Trump? So both Anat and I have a lot to say about this, but I would love your take on the question, do Israelis actually like Trump? And then we will move to Dani Danieli's presentation that I'm really looking forward to.
So you're asking me, do Israelis really like Trump?
You actually like Trump? That was the question, yes.
It's an excellent question because I don't know many who like Trump, but then again, that might be my personal milieu, right? Do they like, I'm sure that there were many right-wing Israelis, especially those in the settlements, who liked Trump a lot when, he was talking about allowing Israel to extend sovereignty over the settlements that they live in. So, yeah. But, probably those Israelis who like Netanyahu like Trump. Are they the majority right now? I don't know. I think that the Israelis who are more right-wing, the settlers today, don't like Trump so much anymore because their whole dream of the greater land of Israel has basically been put on hold or taken off the table completely since this new peace deal with the UAE was announced a few days ago.
Thank you. So let's Anat, why don't you introduce Dani to us, and then hopefully we'll have some concluding questions to all of you.
So it's a treat to introduce Dani Danieli. He's an Israeli-born founding director of Beit Avichai. Anyone living in Jerusalem can't even imagine life without Beit Avichai. Beit Avichai is a home for Israeli Jewish culture. It sounds to you like duh, but it isn't. It turns out that it's the only place in Israel that actually defines itself as one that's meant to augment Jewish and Israeli culture together. He's a responsible adult at work, but he has a child's soul at play. He's broad-minded as they come, and yet he's an aficionado of refined, distilled language, which of course is poetry. Poetry and piyut. Anyone who loves poetry in Jerusalem, this is one of the phone numbers you have, is Dani Danieli. He's a pioneer leader in creating a bridge between Israelis and their Jewish heritage. You think that it's the Jewish state. Why do you need a bridge? They're probably born as super Jews. Well, no. Just think of the Israeli next door, wherever you are, and you're all over the United States and Canada and Israel. Think of the Israelis, are they really knowledgeable in Judaism? Do they ever come to shul? Do they love this stuff? These are questions that Dani Danieli has spent his adult life working on. So he allows Israelis to have a nuanced and textured message that Judaism is not the corrupt establishment that they know. Judaism is actually bigger and better than that. So Beit Avichai is a celebration where Israelis get to fall in love with Yiddishkeit and on all its very many perspectives, a treat. He's a political activist, a mentor and a consultant to other social activists. He's married to Liora. He's the father of 3, a grandfather of 5. And he is, if I may say so myself, a phenomenal cook. Dani, what brings you to the States for 3 damn years, way before the thousands joined you?
Yeah, I think that, thank you, Anat. First of all, you reminded me different times, Bet Avichai, etc. But it's not my ticket this evening. By the way, to bear with my English, it's not perfect like Judy's, but I'll try my best. And I'll bring you pictures, photos, so maybe it will improve my position here in this webinar. I want to emphasize a few things because maybe you can get a wrong impression about this current demonstration, etc. It all started more than 3 years ago. And it started with a protest against Israel Attorney General, Dr. Mandelblit, who did everything to delay investigation against Prime Minister and dragged his feet till he pressed charges. Dr. Mandelblit also refrained investigating the role Netanyahu played in the submarine affair. I don't know whether you're familiar with this affair, but it is sensational and occupy a lot of public attention here in Israel. In spite of the fact that there were severe suspicions of favors to Netanyahu, he refrained from investigating it. So basically, it started with a campaign against Mandelblit, of course, against Netanyahu, assuming that he is corrupted, like Judy said. Only in November 2019, Mandelblit indicted Netanyahu on charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. And to remind you, we are in an era of Netanyahu trial, which started on this July 19. And from then on, the focus is, to me and to my colleagues, on what we see as unbearable situation of Prime Minister who is on trial and still leads the country. I can say he leads the country to the in the wrong directions. In my eyes, it's not only what happens in court, but everything, almost everything that Netanyahu does contradict the basic values of on which this country is based. I am, and this is my basic position personally, I am deeply worried regarding the present and the future of Israel and the future of my children and grandchildren here. It's very personal and national to me. So Netanyahu is damageful to Israel, and the most severe damage is done in everything that is related to democracy and the legal system in Israel. We have no time to get into it, but I think that every day, things that Knesset contradict the basic Israeli democracy notion. Now, let's start with some pictures. I want to share screen. Do you get it?
Yes.
Okay. We'll start with, this is July 17, and this is my wife. And by the way, this is my wife, Leora, and it's a good opportunity to say or to remind that she's a partner. I'm on the street so many times in so many Motzei Shabbat, Saturday nights, that without the support of your spouse, it's very difficult.
Here, here.
Instead of going to the cinema or a theater or music concert to go to the what we call the Paris Square. רגע, למה אני לא מצליח להעביר כאן? One moment. זה לא עובר, רגע. שנייה, one moment.
אולי אתה צריך להזיז את maybe you need to move the screen where you see us. You can tap on the top of the screen and move it so that you can have control over the presentation.
רגע.
אתה יכול ללחוץ על החלק השחור למעלה ואז להזיז איפה שאתה רואה את התמונות שלנו ואז יהיה לך יותר קל להזיז.
אוקיי, רגע.
No, maybe in the meantime, tell us what it says on the signs.
It's written above. It says, Mandelblit, wake up, Bibi, resign.
Yeah, okay. Now, here is the famous Paris Square, in which we spend every Saturday night. Here it's 2017, and there were, that time I'm talking about 50, 60, sometimes 70. But from the beginning of this activity, I must say that most of my friends says, oh, it's very nice that you do it, but they didn't want to join this activity. They saw that it is very strange that a person goes every Motzei Shabbat to demonstrate against corruption. Now, it's much more complicated, but I think that what I told you really summarized what it's all about. Now, let's understand. We are talking about something like 2 years where the attendance in Paris Square was around these numbers. Now, there were other centers, like in Kikar Goren, in Goren Square in Petah Tikva, in Rosh Pina and other places. But we are talking about hundreds of people almost without any media coverage. I would say, and maybe Judy, you can correct me, that this protest, starting on 2017, I guess that some people will say that it started earlier than it, is Israel, longest in the history of Israel. Now, the people who leaded this activity were adults. The average age of the people was around 60. Now, you can see in this picture, in this photo, a demonstration on winter time in Jerusalem. Believe me, it was quite cold. Another picture, but here
Could you just say what the signs say? What are the signs saying?
I think that I wrote it, no?
In most slides you wrote it.
Yeah, I think that loving Israel, separating from Netanyahu, corrupted people go home, and who is running the country? Okay, these are the signs. Saving the country, fighting corruption. This photo, which was taken in the winter. Now we'll jump to February 2020, almost 2 years after the previous photo. Still the same picture. So this is very important to understand that only in April, and it has to do with, and Jody talked about it, with the third election in this series of election. People started to go to the streets, and the most important thing was that age group of 40 to 50 joined us, which was a real so the establishment of a movement called the Black Flags, and they brought more people to the scene, which was so nice. Now in May, you can see here a picture where the demonstration became quite wild. People here tied themselves to to the gates of house in Rehavia. And by the way, the lady in the front is the establisher of Black Flags, this movement that I spoke about earlier. Now, in May, towards the establishing the monstrous government with 36 ministers, demonstration moved to the Knesset, and you can see here trying to keep social distance near the Knesset gates. You have to remember, and Judy didn't mention it, many people, young, adult, etc., were very much frustrated by the readiness of Kahol Lavan, blue-white party of Mr. Gantz and Mr. Ashkenazi to join Netanyahu government. A thing that they claimed in the three campaigns that they will never do. They promised their voters never to join Netanyahu. So when they joined Netanyahu to this emergency government, it really was another thing on top of the things that Judy mentioned that brought many young people to the scene. Another picture of what happened in the Knesset: flowers, candle, gates, and many people. Now, as you see here, the demonstration again took sometimes a wild side. Here, some of our colleagues, our friends, blocked the entrance to the office of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and didn't let us to come to a weekly meeting on Sunday. This was a very important moment for us. Now, Jody mentioned the arrest of Reserves Brigadier General Amir Askel. By the way, I have a picture of Amir. Amir here's the guy on the side is Amir Askel, and I'm holding the sign. Okay, so this is the guy, a very great guy. But when he was arrested, we were there, Liora and I were there, and people blocked the road, which really symbolized something that was very extreme in this idea, in this evolution of the protest. I want to jump here to July 2020, another turning point of the demonstration and protest. The camp that we had near the Prime Minister House gate was invaded by employees of the Jerusalem municipality and policemen. They took a lot of equipment and a few guys were wounded. One of them is Roy here. Now he's very essential to the protest. This guy is a senior reserves officer and is one of the leaders, real great leaders of the protest. I want to jump after Amir, and then, okay, this talking about family and support. This is my daughter Yael on the left side, who joined after having a baby, joined the protest. Here, another thing that was developed was the activity on bridges. There are almost 300 bridges in Israel who people to whom people come and they are shouting and raising flags, etc., etc. Here it's Liora and I on a bridge near to Jerusalem. Now, the most important thing, of course, and now I relate to Jody, is the young people who joined the protest. I will not elaborate. I have something to elaborate on it, but I will leave it to afterwards. I think that for us, the veteran people, it was really something like a miracle. There are some reasons, some other reasons, if you ask me, I will elaborate on that later, that brought young people. But the fact is that after few years, when we were only few hundred, now involved in the protest are several tens of thousands of people, which is really a different picture. Nobody can ensure what will happen in the future, but this is certainly a very, very encouraging thing for us. You can see from last week, the masses who demonstrate on Saturday night in Balfour Street. See something for you in English. You can read the sign. But by the way, there are many signs in English, and the international media are very much interested in what happens in the protest, and you have to mention it. And it's only a development that occurred in the last months. And this is my from last Friday. This is my son Nadav, who also it took him time to join, but now is part of the protest. Another sign. I think that Judy talked about the creativity. So here is demonstration of creativity, and another one. This is to end this presentation. This is the way the Paris Square and the Balfour area, the Prime Minister House area, this is the way it looked just yesterday. I think that maybe it can give you idea what happens there. And regarding the future, I guess that you'll have some question. I will try my best to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dani. So before I jump into everybody's questions here, there are great questions. I'm gonna cover them all. I'm gonna try. I wanted to ask you, when you were standing in the cold every Saturday night, did you imagine that tens of thousands of people would be joining you every Saturday night?
No, I opt for it. I opt for a few thousands, but and I was never desperate like many others. But we were quite. We had a lot of questions regarding where are the young people, and we did some acts in order to attract them, etc. But we didn't succeed. It had to come from them. That's the idea. And I think that few young have a critical role in recruiting people, and they did a fine job. And on top of it, there were, some factors that Judy mentioned earlier, and I can mention other maybe later.
Thank you. So I want to cover some of the questions that people asked about the people who are demonstrating. People asked, is it individually based or organizational based? People asked if there are Arab protesters. Can you share more about kind of the sociologies of the demonstrators?
There is one thing that I have to mention. It is happening in coronavirus era, meaning that many people are afraid to go out. I must share with you that it's not a simple thing even for me. Sometimes I have this thought of going out and being infected. I mean, it's not trivial at all. Now, Judy mentioned earlier that there are a lot of groups, organizations, semi-organization that are involved. Sometimes they cooperate very well. Sometimes they don't do it, and I will tell you that I am in a role from time to time to compromise between different interests and different people. We are Jews, and people have ego, and it's not simple, but I can say that at least the massive demonstrations on Saturday nights are, a kind of real cooperation. Arabs, not too many. There are pictures of Arabs on the bridges. There are some Arabs even in Balfour, but small numbers. And by the way, there are also some ultra-Orthodox. I can tell you that there are at least 30 to 40 guys who come frequently to the demonstration, which is very nice, but it's not, I mean, it's not big numbers.
Yeah, and just to elaborate, I think that I'm referring to Michael Laufer's question about individuals or organizations. So there are many veteran organizations in Israel, like IRAC, like the Association for Civil Rights, like multiple organizations that have done great work and also organized protests. But this movement is, and of course there are political parties who sometimes organize protests. But these demonstrations are organized by new groups. Sometimes they're registered organizations, sometimes they're just people coming together. It's very, very grassroots. Would you agree, Dani?
Yeah, I agree, but to be more precise, accurate, there is an involvement of veteran organization. How can you translate the התנועה לאיכות השלטון?
Judy.
The movement for quality government, isn't it?
Yeah, quality government. They are taking a part, for instance, which is one example. Political parties, especially opposition parties, try to be involved, and they are sometimes they are good partners, and sometimes you can notice that they want the demonstration to serve their interest, and there are conflicts regarding it, but mostly it's grassroots. And most of the people I know come, you know, as individuals to the demonstration, following publications.
And that's also what you can see in the signs, that people make their own signs. They don't bring a pre-printed sign that some organization has made for them, but they bring their own signs.
Some of them, I mean, there are, you know, I hold the veteran sign. It's my sign for almost 3 years, and I insist on keeping it. But we encourage creativity. And actually, last Saturday, there was a workshop in a park near the demonstration area where people sat together and planned the posters and this kind of thing. So there is a place for creativity. I'm a bit conservative on this and some less, but you know, when you want to rise to let young people come and feel that they are involved, you have to let them, of course, bringing their own ideas to the table.
Shep is asking about the LGBT presence, gay and lesbian presence at the protests.
Very much noticed. I think that, of course, I think that it's a very deep question because it asks something about the nature of the protest. The protest is very, very liberal. I guess that in a sense, it rejects, in spite of the fact that we want to include Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, we don't give up the liberal side, and of course, everybody is invited. We want people to feel good, so you can see the flags of the movement also in the demonstration. So, and I hope that I reflect something that is correct. If there are any remarks on this aspect, I will be very glad to receive them.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask both of you, Dani and Judy. I think we're seeing the protest movement, obviously the Black Lives Matters movement in the US, and we're now seeing the movement in Belarus and actually some of our friends in the Reform congregation in Minsk were arrested this weekend in Belarus, and we're seeing the protest movement in Israel. Do you think that this is an international moment for awakening for people because of the virus, or do you think how do you see this as an international phenomenon or as a local phenomenon?
Judy, you start.
I think both. Definitely, you know, the coronavirus, the fact that on the one hand, there isn't much to do. On the other hand, there's a lot of angry people out there. And they're just going out to the streets. So, and we saw it in the United States, we're seeing it in many countries. But of course, Israel has its own unique circumstances. You know, we have a prime minister who's on trial now for pretty serious corruption charges, and this is not an international phenomenon. It's very unique to Israel. Having 3 elections that end in stalemate is also something very unique to Israel. So there is both the particular and the universal, I would say, in all this.
I tend to agree. And by the way, I saw the pictures, the photos from Minsk today, and it is so inspireful. But because you have to remember that we have problems with about it yet. But it's not, you know, a brutal government or a brutal police like in Minsk. I mean, people there are inspireful, and for me, you know, it's and I hope it will be a real winner of the human spirit there, because they are very courageous, and in Israel it's not like this. I mean, still demonstrations are allowed. And by the way, you have to know all that because of a law that was passed in the Knesset 2 weeks ago, Netanyahu now, according to a law of a special סמכות מיוחדת, special authority, because of the corona, can prevent demonstration in Israel. I don't think that he will do it, but he has the power, he and his, to block demonstration in order to deal with the coronavirus. And part of the protest was also against this law. So we are not in a bad shape like Belarus, and we are much more persistent, I think, than in America. I mean, again, we're talking about few years. I don't know what will happen in America next month, but I think that the demonstrations there are almost over. So human spirit, I would say human spirit, again, against dictatorship or a feeling that democracy is endangered. People are going to go out, they go out, and it's great.
Great. Joanne is asking about the protests building or creating an opposition leader to challenge Netanyahu in the next elections. Great question. What do you think?
I wish. I don't know. Nobody seems to be emerging, but you know what? It can also be timing. If someone were to emerge right now, it might be too early. You know, they would gain popularity and then fizzle out by the time there's an election. So maybe it's a good thing that there's nobody who has kind of taken over leadership of this whole thing right at this point.
Look, my education is in political science, but I don't want to be a political scientist here. I would say that one of the successes of Netanyahu was that he really managed to get rid of all potential following leaders. So if you ask me whether there is someone in the Likud, for instance, which will replace him, I would say right now I don't see this option. An option which is very threatening to me, but it's another seminar, is Naftali Bennett. the head of the right-wing party. According to the surveys, he gains a lot of support, some of it from people who are disappointed from Netanyahu, and is very dangerous today to someone that is much more dangerous in Netanyahu. So no good news in this respect.
I'm gonna allow Eve, who's been raising her hand for a long time, to talk. Eve, you have a question for us? Okay, we're gonna continue, and maybe Eve.
She's muted.
Oh, she's muted.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've asked her to unmute. And okay. We'll give it more time. Maybe she's been raising her hand for a long time. So, Leslie is asking if we can widen the problem of corruption to the actual neglect of citizens in terms of health and education, social welfare, police. And I'm going to also connect it to the person who asked, how can Netanyahu be leading a country and facing charges at the same time?
Ladies first.
How can Netanyahu
be leading the country and facing and being in court at the same time?
It's a very good question, for certain.
It's a very good question. I believe there's a petition to the High Court about it that we'll see what happens. He may not be allowed to. The High Court could decide that he can't.
So just to also put the political processes in context, in the recent weeks, we've been hearing about the chance that there would be another round of elections, perhaps in November. The timing of that is also connected to the Netanyahu trial. The Netanyahu trial has begun, and the evidence proceedings, which will take place 3 times a week, begin in January. So many people believe that Netanyahu has an interest of having elections before January so that he can try and remove authorities from the courts before the date of January, where the evidence hearings will begin. And then when it's 3 times a week, that is a huge threat. People asked when Netanyahu would be incarcerated. We don't know if he would be found guilty, but even if he is found guilty in a trial, that the earliest we can imagine a verdict in a trial is 2021. It's not going to happen in 2020. The end of 2021. It's not going to happen at the beginning of the year, and even that is very, very quick. And then he has the right to 2 appeals before the verdict is sealed. So the legal track for Netanyahu, even if he is found guilty in all of those trials, is very long, which is why the protest movement is saying this is not a legal issue. It is a public issue, which needs to be discussed in those platforms. I'd like to take go ahead, Dani, sorry.
I think that this is a very important perspective on the matter, because to us, the people on the street, there is no way that Netanyahu will continue to rule till at the end of the legal process, or even to the next election. We really perceive what he does now, the things that he does now, as damageful and can you say destroyful and horrible, or whatever word you want, to the state of Israel. We don't have patience, and I want to say that even in the if we are not talking about court and trial, etc., things that he does, lies that he tells, must take him out of the position. Whether we can do it, whether we can succeed, I have questions. I'm optimistic, but this is the right thing to do. Some way or another, to take him out of his home in Balfour. Whether it will be from the Likud, from outside the Likud, with the help of courts, etc., we don't know.
Judy?
I agree with what Dani said.
Yeah, I think that we're all in a place where we don't know exactly what the. I'm going back to Joanne's question. I don't think either anyone in Israel has the path to the end of the Netanyahu years clear, but we're seeing an uprising of people who are saying the time is now. We're the people who are going to make it happen, and we're now gathering together and forming the new movement. I think that's what that is the movement we're seeing right now.
I must be frank with you. I have a lot of friends in the protest movement who are very optimistic, who really started to summarize Netanyahu era, and saying, okay, it's a matter of months, of several months. I am much more skeptical. And one of my roles, and I see it as a role, is to say, guys, no way, it will not go out, it will be, and we have to continue to push. We can't expect Netanyahu to leave his position freely.
Yeah. So I just wanted to take a few more minutes to speak about the intersection of all the great things that you've shared with us, Dani and Judy, with the core issues of IRAC and our ongoing work for over 30 years now. I think that the main interaction points are two. One is the issue of the threats to the justice system, the corruption charges, and maintaining the position of prime minister while being in court puts Netanyahu in a conflict of interest, and that's being discussed on the news in Israel all the time now about how the person who is now being charged is going to nominate the next chief of police, and how the person who is being charged is going to be nominating and promoting judges. So that's an ongoing discussion, and the independence of the judicial arm of government in Israel, which is so essential to any democracy, and even more so to the Israeli democracy, where there are very few other checks and balances, is something that IRAC has been dealing with for many years now and are committed to continue to dealing with. The second issue that Dani has alluded to briefly in some of his presentation is the issue of police brutality and police violence, which the protest movement has seen and continues to see. People asked what the breaking news that Anat was sharing in Hebrew before the presentation began was. That was about a new order from the Attorney General that he said he wouldn't press charges against demonstrators because the police has been so violent against the demonstrators, and we've been following police brutality against Arabs, against Ethiopians in the work of IRAC for many years, and we are seeing that as a major threat to democracy, and putting a lot of resources into investigating that, irrespective of how we started doing that before the protest movement, many years before the protest movement, but we're seeing now the heightened public awareness to police brutality, and this is a good opportunity to act against it. Dani and Judy, do you want to comment on the role that police brutality plays in the demonstrations?
Well, this is not an issue of police brutality per se, but I definitely witnessed last night something that seemed to me police taking liberty where they shouldn't have been. So as I mentioned to you before, I'd gone to Caesarea with a few friends, and now what they have done is they've closed off the street where Netanyahu lives. It wasn't clear whether he was there yesterday or not, but you can't walk down that street. So what happened is a lot of demonstrators, one was telling the other that, well, you can go to the street that is one parallel to Netanyahu's, and there's a very nice couple there who don't like him very much, and they were letting people in their house, and they could see from their window Bibi's house, because otherwise you can't see it. And there was this whole kind of parade of people going there. So he said, let's go, and we'll see Bibi's house. We get there and the police had cordoned off the area and said, you can't go there. Why not? Because we said so. You can't walk down the street. Now, this is not the street where the prime minister lives. This is a street next to him. And the police simply said, because we said so, you can't walk down this street. So I will say that I haven't personally really witnessed a lot of the violence, but I know it happens late at night. I usually don't stay that late. It's after 11 or 12. So I have, of course, I've seen clips on TV, on the internet, so I am aware of it. Personally, I haven't felt it, but it seemed very out of place, especially I think those, and they stop with the water cannons, those scenes of them shooting those water cannons directly at the kids. And in one, you see actually a kid whose like neck went back from the force of that water. I mean, that can't be legal.
Dani, you're muted.
Sorry. I wanted to add, first of all, there are, I saw 2 or 3 examples of brutality, but again, it's not a brutality of killing people. Not that I wish that these things will be done like in other countries, but I can talk a lot, an hour from now on, which you don't want, on police stupidity. And this is a thing that we notice almost every day. I mean, it's something that Judy said. Okay, you have to go there. Don't put this sign here. Why are you putting chairs on this way? And we really have a joke when we see a policeman coming toward us. What will he say or she will say now? Because it's not regulated, and they want to say something. And I can tell you, and this is a secret, maybe a secret, and I cannot elaborate now in this opportunity, that the police, we must give the police a lot of credit to the growth of the protest and demonstration. Because of their stupidity, Amir Askel was arrested. I mean, Judy, it was the most stupid thing on earth. They shouldn't, there was no reason to arrest Amir. And his arrest really brought a chain of events that led us to the place we are now in. So, stupid. And
I would say that the political context here plays a major role in the sense that the new Minister of Police, Amir Ohana, is a very close ally of Netanyahu, and he sees it as his role to protect Netanyahu and to try and curtail the movement. And there are also very incriminating recordings of him asking the chief of police, really, you're treating the protesters in Balfour and near the prime minister's house like you would treat Ethiopians, like you would treat Haredi? Why aren't you kind of getting more people wounded in the demonstrations? That's what he said to the Jerusalem chief of police.
But you have to clarify that at least up till now, maybe there will be another law, is not the Minister of Police, of Internal Security, is not allowed to command the police. He cannot give instructions to the police. So he has these recommendations or questions or sometimes is not command the police and demand from them to realize this policy.
I would like to add something about police stupidity. I agree with you completely, Dani, but I've had 3 decades to look at police stupidity, and I think I know where it stems from. Instead of making decisions about real security, they're very interested in issues of territoriality. They're very territorial. This is mine and it's not yours. I can speak for 31 years at the wall. don't put your talis here, don't touch the shofar, don't light a menorah. These are all territorial issues, not really anything to do with theology. And sadly, I think it's seeping from the occupation. I think that the fact that the law enforcement in Israel is obsessed with territory, showing that it's mine and it's not yours, seeped from regulating the non-Jew into the Jewish sector.
Okay, we have to end soon, but I'm going to give you 3 more questions. One is from Ken asking about more details about the upcoming trial. I'll answer that. Ken is asking about the trial testimony and what's going on in the courts now. The court has given, Netanyahu has had many lawyers, many of them quit. He asked for a special ability to get a donation for the coverage of his legal expenses, and he was not given the ability to get a donation. And so he now has a new legal team. That legal team has been given 6 months until January to prepare for the trial. So that's what they're doing now. The trial is not going on now. Once the trial begins, there will be no filming at the trial, but we will have the court summary every day. So we will be able to follow the trial as it happens. I'm going to give you a question from Leslie. Leslie is asking, if we want to get Bibi supporters to wake up, why not focus on the issues that affect them and every family in the country? And Mark is asking, how will the Biden administration deal with Netanyahu and vice versa? So these are going to be the 2 easy questions. They're going to be the concluding questions for today. Maybe, Judy, do you want to take the Biden question? And
I was going to take the first one, actually.
Sorry, go for it.
I think every election it comes up, we've got to talk, where's Bibi's base? We know it's what we call the periphery of the country in working class towns. And every election, there's always this attempt, okay, if we explain to these people that actually voting for Netanyahu, who is a true capitalist, is not in their issues, and we have to explain to them that if they want better health and if they want better schools and better education for their kids and better roads and better access to other parts of the country, it's important that they vote for parties that have more of a socialist agenda, and it just doesn't work. The Bibistim, they call them, right? He can do no wrong for them. They're kind of blinded by their loyalty to them, and I kind of think it's maybe a hopeless cause. I hate to say it.
Thank you. Dani, about Biden?
First of all, I agree with Judy regarding the Bibistim, the Netanyahu extreme supporters, and this is not a minor group, unfortunately. So they have between 5 and 6 mandates for the Knesset, which is a problem. Regarding Biden, first of all, I really hope that if I can say that I wish that Biden and Kamala Harris will win. But if they win, and I hope they win, it will be the end of annexation. That's for sure. And I am one of the Israelis who really dislike Trump. By the way, I have a physical reason for that, because the American embassy is about Jerusalem, and the wall of the embassy is ugly, and it's really damageful to the landscape. So this is another reason why I don't want Trump to win. But seriously, I think that it will be much better for us to get a president like Biden and not continue with Trump, in spite of the fact that many Israelis think that our friend, etc., etc. This is a wrong view on the issue.
Thank you guys so much. This has been this was really interesting for me. I'm hoping that it was interesting for the listeners. And, we know that the press is under attack as part of the attack on democracy. So thank you, Judy, to you and to Haaretz for continuing to bring truth to Israelis and around the world. We know that it's hard right now, and we know that it's essential. Thank you, Dani, for your persistence in being on the streets and protecting the Israeli democracy from that perspective. We will publish the topic for our September webinar soon, so we hope that all of our listeners join us then. Please feel free to ask us questions and continue the conversation on email. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.